Grace and peace to you from Onalaska First United Methodist Church. You found our sermon podcast. We hope you enjoy.
Gospel is from John 17, 1 through 4, 1 and 4 through 6, and 15 through 23. After Jesus had spoken the words, he looked up to the heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son so that the Son may glorify you. I glorified you on earth by finishing the work that you gave me to do. So now, Father, glorify me in your own presence with the glory that I had in your presence before the world existed. I have made your name known to those whom you gave me from the world. They are yours, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. I am not asking you to take them out of the world, but I ask you to protect them from the evil one. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, so that they may also be sanctified in truth. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I've given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, and that they may become completely one, so that the world may be known that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. A word from God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Okay, officially on the books, I entered the workforce at age 15. At age 15, I went to work for Aldo's Italian restaurant in my hometown of Washington, Missouri. I was a busboy. One of the benefits of the job is when people didn't finish their shrimp or their pizza, the busboys got to finish that off back in the... That probably wasn't very hygienic. But man, it was good. Aldo decided he was going to shut down the restaurant for renovations, and he was going to open up something different. And so I was out of a job, and I ended up going to Pizza Hut. And I worked for Pizza Hut as a cook. While I was working as a cook, I found out that delivery drivers make a whole lot more money than cooks. So I went to Domino's and started driving, delivering pizzas. I did that for a long time. Elaine and I were dating at this point, and there was some overlap. We were trying to remember, but at some point I got a summer job with a company called V&S Enterprises. Elena did too. This was a friend of ours that had this job where he had contracts where he would assemble. Okay, you know when you get a swing set and you get that stupid bag full of the nuts and the bolts and you're always missing a bolt? That was the job. You have to it gets 3 bolts like this and 2 bolts like this and 2 washers and you put it all in a bag and you seal it. And whatever the job was, that's what you did. If you were missing a bolt, I'm sorry. That was probably me. Did that. Then we decided to move into St. Louis. By this time we were married and we were going to school in St. Louis. And so we moved into St. Louis, and I went from Domino's in Washington, Missouri, my hometown, to Domino's in Chesterfield, Missouri, which was a suburb of St. Louis, and drove for them. I got tired of delivering pizzas. So I decided to try something new. I went to UPS and worked the night shift unloading trucks. And I got really buff. I was unloading trucks all night long. That didn't last very long. That was a lot of work. That was hard. So I joined a band. You guys know this part of my story. Played in a band and toured America and saw the world and had a lot of fun doing that. When touring began to slow down to make ends meet, I went to work for a company called MSC. I worked the night shift at MSC, Microfilm Service Corporation. I was a microfilmer. Back before computers, isn't that crazy? Like, I don't even think that exists anymore. But we would get stacks of documents, medical records. We had to feed them into the machine and take pictures of them, and then they would store that on microfilm and they would destroy the documents. I actually saw William Shatner's medical records. I never told anybody that, but I wasn't supposed to read them, but I read it. Then, of course, the microfilm service industry, as you can imagine, that was like at the very end of that. I can't believe they were still functioning, but the work dried up there because, people weren't doing that anymore. And so I had a friend, and he said, look, I'm painting high-rise apartments. I'll teach you how to paint. Come with me. And so I joined his team. And for a long time, I painted apartments in the St. Louis area, high-rise apartments. And, people would move out, and we would go in and refresh the apartment, and then somebody new would move in. And that was my job for a long, long time. Then we decided to move to Houston. Moved to Houston. Very first job that I got, I joined a cover band. A band that plays the bars. They play all your favorite tunes while you drink, and you could care less who's up on stage because you're just there with your friends. That was me up on the stage. And I played in Houston and San Antonio and Austin and Dallas and everywhere in between to make ends meet. Did that. Then I got a job with a company called Percussion Center. Percussion Center was a drum specialty shop in Houston that sold any kind of percussion instrument you could think of. I was in sales. I taught music lessons there. I taught drum lessons. And then eventually I ended up managing the music school. So I was in charge of all the teachers and all the students and growing that business. I was driving into the city. I was living in Missouri City, Sugar Land, and driving in. That got to be quite a lot. And so there was a company out near where I lived, Fort Bend Music, that had a similar thing, but it wasn't drums, it was music. And so I went there and taught drum lessons there. I sold pianos for a little bit there. They had the big grand pianos. I sold those. My biggest sale was probably like a $55,000 grand piano I sold to a guy. That was a really good day. But it's hard selling pianos. So eventually I started managing their school at Fort Bend Music as well. So kind of like what I was doing at Percussion Center. I was in charge of all the teachers and all of the students. Then my brother came along. Now my little brother had a real estate photography company. And he said, I need somebody to come and manage my company. I don't have time to do it. I'm doing other things. Will you come manage this? And I said, sure. And so I switched, went over to him, learned the ropes about real estate and about what makes a house sell and what looks good online and what doesn't look good, and managed all the photographers and did a little bit of shooting myself. And it was interesting and fun. But I wanted to become a pastor. And so I took a job on staff at Missouri City First United Methodist Church. Before I was a pastor, I came on as staff, part-time staff. Then eventually I became a pastor, and here we are today. Yeah, I'm tired. So when I decided to go to school and become a pastor, I told Elena, I promise this is the last job change ever. This is it. Until the bishop moves me, right? But I'll still be a pastor. But this idea of, this is it. I'm not going to change jobs anymore. I'm going to be a pastor until I die. That's it. Except, sometimes I think it might be kind of fun teaching a course in college, like a theology or Christian history. But I'm not going to do that. But I think about that sometimes. At the time, as a kid growing up, all of these things just seemed like jobs, right? They're just a way to make ends meet, to get a paycheck, to put food on the table. But looking back now, I'm older, looking back, I can see how God was working in each one of those scenarios. I was I was gaining experience that I use today. I was building relationships that I still have today. They were more than just jobs, even though I didn't know it at the time. We are working our way through this book, Liturgy of the Ordinary. Tish Harrison Warren, pastor over in Austin, she's just looking at ways in which our faith can grow in everyday circumstances. We've looked at things like making your bed and eating leftovers for lunch, all kinds of interesting things. And today, she's looking at work. Work in general, not just your occupation or your vocation, but the tasks that you do on an everyday basis. In particular, this one she's looking at is checking her email box and replying to her emails. And it's got me interested, so I had to look at my email box. Guess how many unread emails I have in my box right now? Any guesses? How many?
A comma.
A comma? No, I have a lot. I have 12,770 unread emails in my box right now.
Up there in the corner says delete.
Yeah, delete. I'm going to be deleting forever. Delete. Does that make anybody cringe? Does anybody? Yeah, so I don't care that I have 12,770 unread emails. It doesn't bother me. Because you see the preview. When it comes in, I know I can just read the first line and know if it's something I want to open or not. So there's a lot in there that's just junk mail, But Tish Harrison Warren says that her email box, looking at that large number, it actually makes her feel like a failure. It makes her, like inside, she goes, ah. And so what she does is she just avoids her email altogether, which makes the number only bigger. I get that. I understand. Maybe not with email, but I understand tasks that you would just rather put off till later. Certain tasks that you just go, oh, I just don't even want to tackle that. I don't even want to think about that. Jobs that are tedious and boring and maybe overwhelming, which is maybe why I've had so many jobs. I get that feeling. I understand that. I switch jobs a lot. Tish was thinking through all this, right? She's writing this book, and so she's like, nothing is trivial here. All of my life means something, and so how can my faith grow in checking and replying to emails and the tasks that I do every single day? And she was thinking about the Reformation. The Reformation, 1500s, when the church radically changed. A lot of things changed about how church looks today. We are sitting here today reading our own copies of the Bible because of the Reformation. Okay? A lot of things changed. But one of the things that happened during the Reformation was the scandalous idea that all jobs matter. That when it comes to importance or hierarchy or holiness, that the Pope's job is just as important to God as the dairy farmer. That was a radical idea, right? Because leading up until this, certain jobs were, other jobs were holy and then other jobs no. But the Reformation kind of changed that. In fact, Martin Luther said this, God himself will milk the cows through him whose vocation it is. And so Tish began to wonder, well, could God himself check email through me? Could God balance the family budget and fold the laundry through me? Could he fill out bureaucratic work forms through me? It's an interesting question. I mean, what if the work that we did in the world, not just our jobs and occupations, but also just our everyday tasks, what if they weren't just work, but what if they were a holy endeavor? What if they were small pieces in the puzzle of God's grand kingdom vision? That final age of shalom that we talked about last week, that God is ushering in as we pass the peace of Christ to each other. God has a vision of how this is all going to end. We got a glimpse of that in Isaiah 65 today. Behold, I am making a new heaven and a new earth, a time when all weeping will cease and labor will not be in vain. The work of the hands will mean something. What What if eternity was ushered in bit by bit by bit through our daily tasks and our chores and our jobs and our careers? Would that change how you feel about work? Would that move your heart toward faith a little bit more? At the end of our church services, we usually have a blessing, benediction, a time of blessing and sending out into the world. I usually say something like, now you're called to go out into the world and live as God's faithful children. We believe that the work that we are doing right here and right now in the hymns and in the scriptures, in receiving the sacraments, that this somehow follows us out into the world. It's the reason that we come week in and week out, to be refueled, recharged, and sent back out into the world. This is called liturgy. We call this liturgy, these call and response, the corporate prayers that we do. This is liturgy, which is a Greek word which means the work of the people. This is the work that we are doing unto God before we are sent out into the world. We're refreshed, we're renewed. And in some ways, I guess, in doing this, we become living sacraments. You know, I talked about that word a couple weeks ago, sacrament, this idea that God does something invisible through something tangible. We come to the table, bread and wine, and it looks like bread and wine, but somehow God is doing something invisible in that. What if our lives are becoming sacraments, living sacraments? That something is being done in us that we are carrying out into the world as we incarnate the glory of God and we bring it to those who don't even know they're thirsty. And in the process, we are changed and the world is changed. But this is not because of us, right? You think about sacraments, you think about the bread and the wine. There's nothing special about, this is Hawaiian bread. Probably came from Brookshire's, thank you. Right? But I mean, it's just bread and juice. It's not about us. It's not about the things that are becoming holy. It's about what God is doing. That God is the active agent that is working and flowing in and through our lives. There is a professor and theologian who's had a huge influence on me. Her name is Catherine Tanner. She teaches at Yale. She gives an analogy that I think is helpful in thinking through this. She says, we believe we're image bearers. The Bible teaches that we are created in the image of God. But what does that mean exactly? And most people would say, well, we are image bearers and that we have creativity or the ability to love or that we can rationalize, that we have free will, as though we are instilled with some kind of divine quality that reflects God. And so we're image bearers and that we can do things that God can do. That might be true, but Catherine Tanner says, what if we're image bearers, not in this way, but in that we reflect the glory of God like a mirror? Like a mirror. Now think about a mirror for a second. A mirror all by itself is nothing. It's just a mirror. However, when you step in front of that mirror, it now bears your image, right? I mean, the mirror by itself isn't doing anything. It's not great in and of itself. Its purpose is to reflect something or someone. And it's only as glorious as the one who is reflected in it. So she says, when we allow the Spirit to use us where God is already at work, whether that is on the job or doing the dishes or answering emails, then we bear the image of God and reflect that glory into the world. Not only that, Catherine Tanner says, the more that we position ourselves in the presence of God in this way, the better we become at reflecting. We are transformed. Almost like we start out as those twisty funhouse mirrors. You know, you've seen those when you go to a funhouse and you get the funny looking mirrors. Like we are misshapen mirrors, and we are transformed into full upright mirrors. And we start reflecting brighter and clearer images of God to the world. Tish said, our task is not to somehow inject God into our work, but to join God in the work He is already doing in and through our vocational lives. That's what sacraments do. God is the one doing the work. You just show up. Tish was talking about one job that she had before she became a pastor. She worked as an appointment scheduler for a medical complex. She said it was 8 hours of taking phone calls from angry customers in front of a computer screen. And that it was uncreative, it was tedious, it was stressful, lonely, boring work. She said, but there was this lady there named Dee. Let me read to you about Dee. Dee had been on the job for a long time, and she was great at it. She beamed with pride over the family photos that decorated her desk. She knew how to tell which patients really needed urgent care and which were simply being impatient. She remained calm and helped soothe flustered or angry patients. She was good with details, and she seemed to be friends with everyone in the office. Even in a mechanized and robotic environment, in a soulless, stressful office, Dee demonstrated excellence. She honed her craft. She did it well. And in so doing, she made my work life better and kept the place running. She was an agent of redemption. Wow. Dee was a mirror. Dee had practiced reflecting God's glory and had grown clear and bright. And that reflected glory transformed the entire workplace for her co-workers, for the customers, for Tish. I don't know if Dee was a believer or not. I would like to believe that she was, and that she probably read Colossians 3:23, where Paul says, whatever you are doing, work at it with enthusiasm as to the Lord and not for people. Dee was a mirror. Our gospel reading today came from the Gospel of John. This is in chapter 17, right before Jesus is going to be crucified. Now, if I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to be probably trying to figure out how to get out of it, how to run and hide. But Jesus instead starts praying for himself and for the disciples. An amazing prayer. And he says, Father, I have glorified you on earth with the work you gave me to do. I have finished the work that you sent me to do, and I have glorified you in so doing. I have worked at it with enthusiasm, and your glory has been reflected into the world. Now, a lot of times we think, well, the work of Jesus was his crucifixion, right? How could he be praying this before he's even crucified? That's what Jesus came to do, to die on the cross and save us from our sins. But what if that's not the case? What if the work of Christ was the entire life of Christ, starting at Christmas, from the very beginning? What if it wasn't his selection and commissioning of the 12 apostles? What if it wasn't his miraculous works, but the whole of his life, including those tasks, those mundane, uncreated tasks we're talking about? This is what Catherine Tanner calls incarnational atonement. That it is in the incarnation that we are brought near to God. I mean, think about what Jesus had to do. We know that he learned how to be a carpenter with his dad. He was known as the son of a carpenter and a carpenter himself, or a handyman. I'm sure his mom made him do his share of the household chores. You know she did. Mary wasn't no slouch. If they had flocks and herds or animals that the family kept for milk and for meat, I'm sure he had to take care of them, feed them. Jesus, go out and feed the goats, right? Planting and tending gardens, vineyards, groves. I'm sure that the family grew stuff. Learning to read the scriptures. That was part of his education, was learning how to read this stuff and studying it. Worshiping in the synagogue every week. Making the annual trip to Jerusalem to go to the temple with the family. Catching fish. We know that he caught fish and ate fish on a beach with his disciples. We know that he paid taxes. Jesus paid taxes. You see, there was no part of his earthly life that was not part of God's redemptive plan. All of it was necessary. All of it was important. Catching those fish, just as important as the rest of the story, the dying on the cross. We tend to zoom right to the dying on the cross. But I believe that Jesus sanctified all human work, the human experience, the human life. All work that's not God-honoring, right? Anything that's immoral or unethical. But apart from that, Jesus lived the life that you and I lived. And I think sanctified all of that. And so he's praying to the Father. Father, I've done this work that you sent me to do, and I've glorified you. And then he turns the prayer to his disciples. For his disciples. He's praying to the Father for them. And he also says, I'm also praying for those who come to believe in me through their word, which is you and I, by the way. He's praying for us. He prays for several specific things. He says, I'm not asking that you take them out of the world. Don't take them out of the world, but protect them from evil, because I'm going to send them to do the same work that I have done. Do you hear that? The work that you sent me to do, I am sending them to do. He also asks that we be sanctified in the truth of this work. Sanctified, just a fancy word for transformed, set apart, made holy. Set them apart in the truth of this work. And he says, the same glory that you have given to me, I am going to give to them. Patty said it in class this morning. She said it's like passing the baton, right? It's like in a relay race. Jesus says, my part of the race is over. I'm passing the baton, and I'm going to give you everything that you need to do it. I'm going to send you out to do the same work. So that, like Jesus, we too can say one day, I have done the work that you sent me to do, and I have glorified you, God, in this work. Receiving glory like mirrors, that it might be reflected back to God and back into the world. As we practice the art of working well like Dee, as unto the Lord and not for people and not just for paychecks. Like there is something to what we're doing here. And in the process, I believe that we are changed and the world is changed. But most important, God is glorified. God is revealed as the fairest of them all. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest? Why, we see that it's God. God is the fairest one. Tish concludes this chapter. She says, we are blessed and sent to work in this world where we will face fallenness and toil, but even still our labor is not in vain. One day, all of it, even our smallest daily tasks, even answering email, will be sifted and sorted and redeemed. Well, that sounds a lot like what we heard in 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul says, I am building upon a foundation that has already been laid, and others will come after me. And we're all building this thing together. And one day it's all going to be sifted and sorted and tried and tested, and some work will remain. Some won't. But the work that we do here and now matters. It adds to and rests upon the foundational work of Christ in the ongoing construction of God's eternal kingdom vision. That day, it's coming. And God has asked us to be co-laborers, to partner, to do our jobs well, to reflect His glory as we do these things. So my prayer for you is that as you build upon the foundation of Christ, may your work be tested and refined by the fire of God's love. And may it stand firm as a testimony to your willingness to reflect God's redeeming action in the world. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.